You have a saboteur who sits on your left telling you you're no good, you're not great at this, and you have an ego who tells you you're the best in the world. Yeah, it's on top of the mountains, and it's a beautiful experience. And it was the first time ever I was on CNN.
That's very important to not burn bridges, to
Absolutely.
maintain
No,
relationships.
that's what rewarded me all my life.
Yeah,
Hard work pays.
pays.
You relax, you don't get paid.
Absolutely.
That's it.
In all of these roles or in all of this experience, what's your biggest regret? I know that you were born in Lebanon, but you left very early on and you moved to the US. Tell me a little bit about that.
In the 1975 was the first civil war in Lebanon, where my family migrated to the US. I'm one of 9 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
So, and the age gap between me and the eldest brother is 22 years. It was a journey and a big cultural change coming from, a small country like Lebanon into the US, yet alone, just Atlanta was.
And you moved with your parents and all
Yeah,
your siblings.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. In 1978, my eldest brother, moved to the UAE, and my father also started a business in the UAE. By 1982 or 3, I was already living with my brothers or my siblings, but my parents were in the UAE.
Mm-hmm.
At the age of 17, I started to rebel against my parents for leaving me. Of course, this is where I start to have more hunger for the parents and parental guidance,
Sure,
and
sure.
and at that age, I started to blame them for leaving me in the US, not really understanding that the core purpose was my education, my
To
future,
make it financially possible as well.
and to help me with my future. There wasn't much, in Abu Dhabi back then
Yeah,
for me to learn from, or to be in the right schools or the right level. It's a different
of course.
environment as a whole.
Of course.
And I decided that I did not want any family support. So I moved into my own
You're 17 at this point.
17, yeah, my own apartment, and I started my first job.
But had you graduated high school?
I was still in my last year.
You were still in your last
This is my
year.
last year of
Okay.
high school. And I realized I wasn't going to be able to support myself by just working weekends. So I had to work more days during the week, which put a lot of pressure on me. Fortunately, where I lived was across the street from the hotel, so I didn't need a car. And I took the bus to school.
Can I stop you, Haitham? What was the motivation for what drove you so much? Why was it because you were angry at your parents?
Yes, I was, and I wanted to prove that I can do this by myself. I don't need. You've helped 8 children.
Yeah.
I can do this on my own.
Okay, okay.
And I think what made it more challenging is when my parents kept saying, "You cannot do this. You're going to fail. You're not going to be able to go anywhere. You're going to come back." And the more they said this, the more I tried harder not to come back. There were days where I was short on a dollar. I didn't have a dollar, for example, to buy a meal, or I didn't have a dollar to go to the movies. I
Yeah,
was that short.
yeah.
But I pulled myself together, and I, went back to work. Went through university, and there was a long time where I always had at least 2 jobs at a time, full time, part time. And I look, I managed to navigate through life with a lot of learnings. I fall, get back up, fall, get back up. And as you say, you learn a lot from failure because that's what makes you think and reflect.
Of
But
course.
success, unfortunately, hits the ego and it doesn't allow you to think, why did I
And we
succeed?
don't learn from it.
Yeah,
We think it's easy.
it's entitled.
Exactly.
I did it. You succeeded. I did it. You don't need to spend
That's
time
right.
thinking why I did it or how I did it. What can I do better? Because yes, I'm done.
Exactly.
Succeeded. It's the failures that make you go, okay, what have I done wrong? What could I do
Yeah.
differently? What has contributed to that failure, and then make sure that you don't make the same mistake again. The one thing that I had committed to myself through life is that not I would never make the same mistake twice.
You know what's interesting from what you're saying is that at such a young age, you knew yourself so well. At when I was 17, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I went through school, university without a clear plan. And
Mm,
a lot of people do that.
yeah.
But you seem to be very disciplined in what you knew and what you wanted.
And I think, look, this is probably a blessing from God. It's I've always known what I want.
Mm.
If you speak to my family members now, they tell you he always knew what he wanted. He carved his own way out. he came out the other end,
Mm.
successful as he
Yeah.
thought he would.
Yeah.
And it really goes back to just uh, learning how to manifest things. I read something recently that was very interesting. Some people see the glass half full, some people say it half empty, but it's the third part of the people who say, "Oh, there's some water here. At least it's gonna quench my thirst."
It's a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, it's not full, it's not empty. I've got water,
I
right?
have what I need.
I have water. I have what I need.
Yeah.
It's gonna quench my thirst, and that's probably the sort of natural thinking that I would say I was probably gifted or born with, and it just allowed me to really just manifest the positive things in life. And I'm known to be a very optimistic person. Sometimes cautiously optimistic, sometimes uncautiously optimistic, just optimistic,
Sure.
but never reckless. I was never reckless in my life.
Give me an example.
For me, the example of just deciding that I'm going to walk out of, my parents' house and do my own thing in the US, that's a big risk.
Of course.
Now, it may be deemed as reckless. He's, reckless, he's leaving, he's going to fail. But I calculated,
Mm-hmm.
exactly what do I need in order to survive? What pay do I need a week to make it through life? Yes, I'm going to be short, but I knew I would be. And I knew it wasn't going to be as glamorous as
Or
living
it
at
would
home.
be temporary anyway.
It was never temporary. I knew it was going to be a long term, right? I knew it was going to be a long time before I could really stand up on my feet. So I didn't go in thinking this is going to be a short time. I
Mm-hmm.
knew that, but that's what helped me think, build the patience. Because if I thought it was temporary, my patience would run out, and I'd run back home. Just manifesting in my own mind that this could be a long time, but at the end, I know I'm going to come out,
Mm-hmm.
help me sustain.
And your siblings at this point are with you in the US and they see you doing all this. What is their reaction?
No, because where I had disappeared from them for 2 years, where they didn't know where I was.
That's very disconcerting for them. They must have been very worried
They
about you.
were very worried about me, but I had decided that I was going to do this on my own. And look, in the 80s, there was no mobile
Of course.
phones, and people were not tracked as they are
That's
today,
right.
and there's no WhatsApp. So
Yeah.
it's hard. It's harder to find me than they would have today.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But I've taken these decisions, and I've made my mind that this was what I was going to do. I'm going to carve my way out of life, and I'm going to go somewhere where I didn't want to be following certain rules. I didn't want to be the doctor or the engineer.
When you went to university, what did you study?
Marketing.
And what triggered the hospitality bug?
Nothing triggered it except the need for a job in the beginning.
I see.
What triggered this
The career element.
was the how I found myself in that
Right.
environment, and how I really was passionate about serving guests, and how I was accelerating in my career journey. So, for example, I became the youngest restaurant manager at 19 years old.
That
And
is
I was
young.
managing others, including kitchen employees at that age. Um, and I saw myself accelerate in that environment. When I moved to Orlando in the 90s, I worked for the Courtyard by Marriott again by the Orlando airport. I also worked for the Marriott close to Disney. I think it was called the Marriott Forum, big convention center. So but I spent 8 years of my life with Marriott in different hotels.
Overall, yeah.
8 years.
Yeah.
My move to the UAE um, was triggered by my late mother.
Mhm.
After I had spent so much time, she wanted me to get closer and move to the UAE.
How old are you at this point?
25.
And this is the mid 90s?
This is mid
Mid
90s.
90s, yeah.
Correct. And I moved to Dubai with the Intercontinental Dubai, which was the original Intercontinental, was built in 1975. And it was a hotel that had a lot of legacy, history, and it was a luxury
Hmm.
hotel.
Hmm.
Funny enough, I had a French general manager at the time, Henry Blen. We had another gentleman join in as director of sales and marketing, and he didn't stay long. He left after 6 months.
You saw an opening.
I saw an opening, and I went to Henry Blen and said, I want to do this job. And he said, but you haven't done sales and marketing before. I said, yeah, but I studied marketing. And he said, yeah, but you haven't done the job. I said, listen, you bet on this guy, and when you brought him in, you were so confident,
Hmm.
and you didn't even know him, and he's gone. I've been here now. You know me, and I know
I've
you.
proved myself.
Yeah, you took a risk on on a stranger you
Yeah.
didn't know, but you wouldn't take a risk on me, and that made him think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes him think outside the box.
Yes,
He was literally looking for someone from another hotel with a
exactly.
lateral move.
And I said to him clearly, I said, listen, if I'm 70% of where you need me to be, at least you know the 30% gap that I need to work on, right?
Yeah,
So if you help me develop that 30%, and I may never be 100%,
sure,
but let's call me
sure,
80.
sure.
If that 10%, we both know each other, and you can tell me this is what you need to do
Hmm.
to be at 80% or 85%, that's a
Yeah,
B plus,
absolutely.
which is great.
Which is not bad at all.
Absolutely. So look, he was generous enough to give me what we call a personal development plan. He said,
Mm.
look, I've worked with you for a year and a half at the time, so here's the areas I think you're missing to really become a very strong director of
Mm.
sales and marketing.
Mm.
And I'm going to give you 3 months. I said, that's not fair.
Because that's a very short window. 3 months is tiny.
Correct.
Yeah,
So I said, that's not fair.
yeah,
I need 6 months.
right.
So I had to negotiate 6 months, and he agreed.
So you really had a bargaining
We
situation.
shook hands and we agreed. Yeah, it was a gentleman's agreement, and we agreed that that was the case. Some of the things I had known because I was in the environment, I knew some of the weaknesses in that function, right? Now I was in charge of reservations, and sales puts reservations, so we knew some of
Sure.
them. And I knew some of the persons who worked in sales who became farmers. They were in the job for 9 years, 8 years. They're farming their accounts. You know, they
Mhm.
go and meet their clients. They have a coffee. Hi, how are you
It's on
today? And
autopilot.
autopilot. There's nothing they need to do. But we had lost some
Yeah.
accounts to new entrants, to new hotels. We lost some accounts, and the farmers thought, the accounts just moved. So I just keep farming, but there are no hunters
Yeah.
to go and hunt new
Yeah.
accounts. So one of my conditions was that you will allow me to restructure the team without interfering. And I may have to let some people go. I may have to put some people on personal development plans. And if they don't succeed, they don't succeed. But you're going to have to support
Mhm.
me for me to succeed. And he committed to that. And I have to say, he stuck
Mm,
to his
mm,
commitment. And we had to make some drastic change in the
mm,
team.
mm.
We had to make change with up to 50% of the team and bring new, young blood who was really hungry. At the time, the hotel was ranking number 4 in its competitive set. So we've lost our ranking. My job was to bring it to number 1, but it cannot be done in 6 months. It can even be done in a
Mhm.
year because you have contracts in
Yeah, yeah.
play. Yeah. It took us two
Mhm.
years, but we came back to number 1. I still hold that email from the GM.
So that was one of your proudest moments
Absolutely.
and a turning point for you because you went from being operational to being strategic,
Building plans,
building
yeah,
plans,
marketing,
and I'm guessing because of where you are today that that's something you love.
exactly.
When we discussed your pivots, you said I began in hospitality, but then I moved into tourism. Explain to me the difference.
Hospitality is one part of the parcel of tourism.
Right.
The lifeline of tourism is the airline.
Hmm.
To extend to that lifeline, you need the accommodation, which is the hotels. But then to actually make tourism effective, you need the experiences, whether it's gastronomy,
Hmm.
food, whether it's
Yeah.
museums, attractions. So it's an ecosystem,
Hmm.
and the hospitality is one
Is one
component.
part of it.
When we opened the Waldorf Astoria, part of Hilton, in Ras Al Khaimah,
Hmm.
I met His Highness the Ruler at the opening event. And I still remember vividly that meeting. And I introduced myself, Haitham Mattar, and he pulled me back and said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from Lebanon." He said, "That's funny because we have Mattar in Ras Al Khaimah, a small village here called Digdaga, where they are known family
Hmm.
Mattar." And he called the guy called Abdullah Mattar, who was his driver. And he said to him, "Hey, your cousin is here."
How funny. There's also Matar in Libya.
There's Mattar
It's
everywhere
a
across the
name
world.
across the region.
There's Mattar in Egypt.
In Egypt.
I always get stopped at your borders, by the way, at the immigration, because there's a guy who has
Same
also
name
named
as
Haitham
you.
Mattar, but a different mother. So they keep always
They
asking me.
compare, yeah.
I always try to tease them and say, "Did you find the guy?" Yeah, they're looking for some Haitham Mattar, which is not me. That lunch, I sat
Mm,
next to His
mm,
Highness, and yeah, he is very curious. He loves education. He asked me about what school I went to. He asked me about my family.
Mm.
my journey in the US, and he was intrigued by, the journey I had made in hospitality. I then had a call from a gentleman from his palace that was about a year or so later.
That long.
And I was asked to come meet His Highness, which I did.
You had something in mind, but it hadn't happened yet.
Yes. And His Highness, after a long conversation, asked me if I would head up his tourism board. And whilst I didn't really know, a lot about tourism, I knew the hospitality
Yeah.
component. I didn't
Yeah.
know the airlines, and I didn't know the tour operators and travel agents. Yes, I worked with tour operators and travel agents, contracted them for our hotels.
Sure.
So I understood the concept. And I said to him, Johannes, I've not done this. And he said, listen, how many hotels are you in charge of now? I said, at the time, it's about 135. He said, I only have 30 hotels in
Mm.
all of Ras Al Khaimah or so. I'm sure you can manage.
And then you manage the rest of the elements alongside it.
Yes, but Ras Al Khaimah didn't, had a beautiful natural
Yeah.
assets. It was an unknown
That's
emirate,
right.
beautiful beaches. Nobody talked
That's
about it.
right.
So this is where marketing creativity came in.
You're now an entrepreneur
Correct.
in this new role.
Absolutely.
You had been cocooned in a corporate world all your life, and now suddenly you're given this opportunity to create something from
Create a destination
exactly.
and put it on the world map.
What did it make you feel? It must have been a very exciting moment.
It was really really exciting, and I think, look, credit goes to His Highness because he had that openness, and he had
Yeah.
this entrepreneurship mind as well, where he allowed me to venture
Yeah.
into places where I failed in some, I did well in others, but he was always supporting me to go ahead and
Mm.
do things. And every time I ran something by him to say, I want to do this, he would sometimes warn me from his wisdom and
Yeah.
experience that maybe that it won't work. And sometimes it doesn't work, but sometimes it works. But he was never,
He would never say no outright.
yeah, he would always, look at everything, all the
Yes.
options.
And what year are we talking? When did this start?
This was in 2011.
And 11. Okay.
So I came in now from Hilton to wearing many hats, where Ras Al Khaimah had multi brands now. It's not just
Sure.
Hilton;
Sure.
it's other brands as well
Of
that
course.
existed in the destination. Um, so I reached out to Emirates Airlines, to the tourism board, to help me,
Mm.
in starting to market Ras Al Khaimah through their channels and make that an extension of Dubai initially.
Yeah.
And we've had the marketing money to build packages where if you spend 2 nights in Dubai, you get another 2 nights in Ras Al Khaimah.
That's how I know Ras Al Khaimah. I
Yeah,
know so many people in Dubai who go for weekends.
correct,
It's an easy destination. It's completely different.
correct.
So I always think of it as an extension.
It was what was even funny when you went to the gift shop in these hotels. They sold camels that said Dubai on it, and they sold little artifacts and stuff that said Burj Al Arab and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So of course it was an extension.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we wanted to build an identity for the
Mm.
destination.
Mm.
We wanted to carve ourselves out and give it its own
Mm.
right. So the team and I were looking at all these natural assets
Mm.
and the proximity of the mountains to the sea, to the desert, and the fact that you could do so much around these. And how much beautiful nature was in Ras Al Khaimah, opposite the other emirates, was really attractive.
Of course.
They had mountains. They had the highest mountain range that no one ever talked about.
Well, it also juxtaposed from Dubai and Abu Dhabi, which is so built up and commercial.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we really just started to think, how can we
Mm.
play differently? And we thought, wait a minute, outdoor and adventure
Mm.
is something no one is
Yeah.
playing in that space, and we want to own that space. So we started to look at what kind of adventure, and right then what was really trending were zip lines.
Yeah.
Everyone had doing zip lines, and then we started to search, and you find the longest zip line over water, the longest zip line in a city, the longest. We then ran across the longest zip line in the world,
Mm.
which was a Guinness record, and that was in Puerto Rico. So two of my team members and I
Decided to beat it.
we wanted to go to Puerto Rico, and we wanted to do the zip line.
Mm.
So we did. And then we met the owners of the park, and we said, look, we want to build the longest zip line.
We want it even longer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We want to build the longest zip line in the world. And they said, oh, we do it with you.
Yeah.
Great. And the reason we wanted that because they had the experience.
Yeah.
They design, build, and operate. They had zero incidents, zero
It's
accidents.
essential.
We invited them. They came in, and we built the longest zip line in the world.
And is it over water?
It's the mountains.
Oh, it's between mountains.
Between mountains. Yeah.
Okay.
It's on top of the mountains, and it's a beautiful experience. And it was the first time ever I was on CNN.
Oh, really?
And every other channel you can think of,
Oh,
CNBC,
yeah,
BBC.
yeah.
But the interesting
Mm,
part wasn't that I was on CNN. For me, it was Russell
of
Khaimah
course.
on CNN.
It put it on the map.
I then enrolled with the UNWTO
Hmm.
in 2016. And in 2017, because I joined Russell Khaimah in 15, the UNWTO was launching something called the Sustainable Development Goals.
Right.
And me being in an emirate like that, where sustainability,
It's a core value.
core
Of
value,
course.
protecting culture, heritage, the zip line
Yeah,
was,
yeah.
in nature, the outdoor, the adventure. I wanted to be part of that. So the director general at the time, Dr. Talib Rifai, gave me the opportunity to be part of that steering committee
Mm,
of creating the sustainable development goals and launching these, which today we all live
of
by the way.
course. It's the backbone of all tourism now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And because I was hired by His Highness and I reported to His Highness, the UNWTO recognized me by de
Mm,
facto as ministerial level.
right,
So I sat with ministers,
right.
I sat on ministerial panels, and I was,
Mm,
in UNWTO meetings at the same level
interesting.
of
Yeah,
all
yeah.
ministers.
That then led you to being noticed by Saudi Arabia.
That led me to be noticed by Saudi Arabia, where I actually met His Excellency Ahmed Al Khatib, the Minister of Tourism of
Mm,
Saudi Arabia,
yeah,
at one of the
I'm sure.
UNWTO
Of
conferences.
course. And at the time, the Saudis were already looking to 2030.
Yes,
It was already being formulated at
it was
that point,
right at its
at
infancy.
the inception.
I realized, look, I spent 5 years in Ras Al Khaimah. I've done a lot to put the destination on the map,
And it was on its way.
and it's on its way.
Yeah.
I always used to tell His Highness, what do we have in place today in Ras Al Khaimah is if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, your strategy, your execution, your team will continue.
Mm,
It's
it's in
not
place.
dependent on me as a person, right? And I think he valued
Well,
that.
that's good leaders do.
Thank
Good
you.
leaders put things in place so that if you're not there, it's on
It
autopilot.
has to
That
run.
has to be the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We made an agreement that I was going to join the Saudis. I had His Highness's blessing. It was a difficult discussion in the beginning, but what I enjoy today is that relationship with me and His Highness that still
Mm,
exists today.
that's very important to not burn bridges, to
Absolutely.
maintain
No,
relationships.
when I look back at the number of jobs I had
Yeah,
and where I moved,
yeah,
I've never ever burned bridges.
exactly.
And what helped me accelerate is the references you get from people you worked with
Absolutely.
before.
And it's a small world.
And this is more work.
The hotel world, fundamentally, everyone knows each other.
I had family who
Yeah.
wanted to go to Istanbul recently, and
You picked up the phone.
the Intercontinental Istanbul was not offering any discounts. I picked up the phone to the Conrad
Yeah,
in Istanbul and the GM, who is an ex-colleague of Hilton, and
yeah.
I said, "Listen, my family are coming. Can you give them a discount?" And he said, "I'll give them an employee rate."
Oh, wonderful.
So they went and
So
stayed.
yeah, this is how
So,
it works.
oh yeah,
Of course.
but you burn bridges. You don't have these connections
No,
anymore,
no.
right? I have connections with Marriott. I have connection with Hilton. I have
But
connections.
that's also your character, I think, because you're a conciliatory type of person. Otherwise, you wouldn't have made it this far.
Absolutely.
There are lots of people in every field who do burn bridges.
And the key to making sure that these connections stay, because you never know how you're going to need them.
But I
Work.
think the key, Haitham, is not to think of them as connections. You're just naturally a people person. You like to talk to people, you like to make sure people are happy, and that will serve you down the line.
Absolutely.
It's not calculated.
It's not calculated.
No.
When this opportunity
Yeah.
came, and I spoke to His Excellency Ahmed Al Khatib, that this opportunity came with ISG, and I would love to
Mm,
take it. Um, I remember his words. He said, "It's a sense of pride that one of us
mm,
gets that job, and that just made me
of
feel
course.
incredible."
In all of these roles or in all of this experience, what's your biggest regret?
I have no regrets, and I truly, genuinely say that to you because I always trust in God first, and I always trust that whatever decisions I made, right or wrong, were a learning for me.
Mm,
So I never go through life with any regrets. I
mm,
always appreciate the good, the
yeah,
bad, and the ugly.
yeah, yeah.
And I always believe there's a reason why I've been tested. There's a reason why I am testing,
Mhm.
and there's a reason why I am in certain places.
So faith plays a big role in your life,
In my belief,
in your
yeah,
belief.
I tremendously believe in. I'm very faithful, and
Yeah.
I had a conversation with a colleague of mine recently, and he said, "Do you ever doubt
I
God?"
was just about to ask you this. Yeah.
I said, "Never. I have zero doubts about God, and I have zero doubts about God's will. Zero.
Mm.
The moment of doubt I had in my life was when I first laid my eyes on Mecca.
Really? Why?
I walked in to the Haram and I saw the room, and I thought, you have 1.7 billion people actually worshipping to the external minds a empty room, right? So whilst we say we don't, for those who worship,
No, no idolatry.
no
Yes,
idolatry. So
yes,
we are actually praying to the outside world, to a empty
yes.
room. So for a split second there, I had my
A question.
of I don't want to call it a doubt. You're right. It's a question. But when you refer back to Quran and you refer back to the reasons and rationale, you'll understand. You'll understand the symbol of Islam
Mm,
is that, but
mm.
then God is God,
It's something else. Yeah,
is
yeah.
something else. And I always have faith because I never asked God for
Yes,
something.
I understand that, but I also feel that your own path has been so much based on your own hard work.
Sure,
You
sure,
you know,
sure.
uh, you've been lucky with maybe timing in certain situations, but you were a dishwasher at the age of 17 and you made it happen on your own.
In the Quran, it says, "Is'a ya abdi li as'a ma'ak," right? You thrive and I'll thrive with you.
Yes,
And that's where faith comes into me.
yes,
I always feel you work hard, you get rewarded.
exactly.
There's no such thing as an easy lunch.
Absolutely.
That's what rewarded me all my life.
Yeah,
Hard work pays.
pays.
You relax, you don't get paid.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Tell me about your book.
Every person wants to have legacy, and we have a saboteur who sits on your left telling you you're no good, you're not great at this, and you have an ego who tells you you're the best in the world. Yeah, you're better than everybody. And you got to have a balance. And look, every human being has an ego. It's how we learn, and I learned with time where I my ego took the best of me
Mm,
on many occasions,
mm,
and my ego caused me to lose some certain opportunities, and my ego punished me, and only then when I realized this ego was doing me harm. But then Saboteur took the best of me. When my ego bruised me, I went, or got bruised, I went, reverted to my Saboteur, and my Saboteur started to take advantage of me to say, hey, you're no good at this. That's when I seeked out to a life coach. And this life coach made me read a book called Taming Your Gremlin.
At what point of your career did you go to the life coach?
The CEO at the time for ISG, a gentleman called John Bamsey, he's still around, and him and I went off on a great start, and then suddenly couldn't see eye to eye anymore. And he always made comments to me about my ego. You got ego. It's your ego. You're a poser.
Mm.
And all that did was break me down.
This is your first stint at IHG.
Yeah, so I'm still at the initial stages
Yes.
with ISG. Now, I went to see this person, and who took me through coaching me, through the my thinking, my thought process.
Mm,
And he asked me to read this book, and I started to realize, yeah, I've actually did probably rely more on my ego, and now my gremlin, my saboteur, is taking the best out of me because I started to believe less in myself. I
mm,
can't do this.
mm,
There's no way I'm going to be able to have a job that leads Europe, Middle East, Africa. It's impossible. I started to believe it because John built this in my mind. So that balance of balancing your ego and your saboteur was critical. And it took a lot of beating
yeah.
from me
Yeah.
to learn how to
Internal
balance.
wrestling.
Yeah, you have to wrestle internally to balance the both. Shut up,
Yeah.
ego. Shut up, saboteur. Yes, I can do this. No, I can't do this. Yeah, and being realistic
Mm,
of what's possible, and sometimes being unrealistic to say maybe it's impossible, but I got to try.
mm,
And I think, look, the I've always craved for excellence,
mm,
not perfection, but I craved for excellence. And I've worked with people who misinterpreted my pursuit for excellence to pursuit for perfection. And they thought I just wanted everything to be perfect. which can be misconstrued sometimes when you're seeking excellence,
Hmm.
because there's a thin line between perfection and
Yeah.
excellence. And perfection may not be achieved, but excellence can. And this is where, when you start to work with like-minded people who see the vision of excellence and decide, yeah, I want to be part of that
Hmm.
excellence too.
Hmm.
And people only believe in you when they see results.
Hmm.
When they see that you actually can do excellence, they'll all come on board.
Yeah. And these are the kinds of themes that you're including in your book?
We're talking about this. We're talking about the challenges I've faced in during my career. We're talking about, the successes I've had, but we're talking also about the entire journey of how I learned this trait
Mm.
of hospitality. What were the key learnings for me
And you're doing it as a way to motivate people to join the industry, right?
to join the industry? Because
Yeah.
we're seeing, look, there's a war for talent today in the
Yes.
hospitality industry. The young generation are not, there's lesser interest in this industry.
Why is that?
You see, the young generation, A, they're impatient.
Yes.
B, they're very well educated.
Yeah.
I think, my son is much more educated than I am, although we would have had the same degree.
Yes.
But the level of exposure he would have had,
The generation has leapfrogged in a way.
absolutely. And,
Yeah.
and you'll be stupid and an egoist to think you can't learn from your children.
Mm.
You're not always the teacher. You're the teacher, or you're a guidance, you're a parental guide until a certain age.
That's right.
But then you got to listen to them
Yeah.
because they've been exposed to things that we haven't
In a
seen
different
in
way,
a
of
different
course.
manner, right? In a different way. They had an iPad, I only touched the computer when I was 35 years
Yeah.
old.
Yeah.
They had an iPad at the age of 2.
Sure.
It's a different world. And my first mobile phone, I was 35.
Mm.
They had or 25, actually 25. They had a mobile phone when they were 10, right?
And different skills
And,
and
and
everything.
different skills,
Yeah.
absolutely. So that is it's for them, the impatience part. Two, they feel we went through 4, 5 years of education. For me to go and stand behind a reception
Hmm.
desk for 8 hours on my feet doesn't make sense.
But Haitham, it's not just hospitality. It's, I'm seeing it across the board that the generation of young, 22-year-olds beginning a career, there is an impatience and there is a lack of desire to begin at the bottom. There's a need to start middle or high.
I think you summed it up really well. The rewarding part of hospitality, it has to come from the passion you have for it.
Yeah,
And it cannot be a job.
yeah,
It has to be a
yeah.
lifestyle. Hospitality is never a job.
That's
It's not a
right.
9 to 5.
No,
You don't go home.
no.
And you have to have the passion for it.
Yeah,
And then you have to have a certain DNA
that's right.
that it allows you to want to be of service to
Mm,
others,
mm, mm.
allows you I always say that people who work on the hospitality, uh, the most people in the world who are motivated by recognition. If you can give them a merit increase, okay, yeah, it goes to the bank and they'll find a window to spend it. But a tap on the shoulder goes a
A lot
long.
much further. Yeah.
What they do when you give them a certificate of recognition, how they frame it, they put it on the wall, they show it to their family, their friends. It's a different type of people.
Haytham, thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you for
Thank you
the
so much.
opportunity. I
Thank you very,
enjoyed
very
it.
much.